Egypt, land of pharaohs, pyramids, and ancient mysteries. A place that continues to surprise us with secrets hidden for millennia. Just when we thought we understood its history, the sands shift, revealing even more incredible discoveries. A second Sphinx? Evidence of a cataclysmic flood? Today, we'll look into the latest discoveries. You may never look at the Egyptian civilization the same again. The second Sphinx found. The second Sphinx is real. The Great Sphinx of Giza was not alone in history. It had a twin. Egypt's tourism official Reda Abdel Halim told the press that a statue of almost identical size to the famous Sphinx was found by the pyramids. The statue originally stood about 210 feet high, extending over 45 feet long from its face to its tail. Halim said that researchers from Zagazig University examined the evidence and confirmed everything to be 100% legitimate. So then why hasn't anyone talked about the second Sphinx being found in more than 3 years? I'm not familiar with Zagazig University, so I'm not sure, but there could be other factors. What do we already know about the Sphinx? And why is having two Sphinxes so controversial? The Sphinx is a mythological creature with the body of a lion and the head of a human. The Egyptians are credited with creating the first Sphinxes, placing them around temples and tombs all over the place. The Great Sphinx was built during the reign of King Khafre from around 2575 to 2465 BC. This makes the Sphinx around 4,500 years old. It was a portrait statue of the king that has withstood the test of time. Not everyone agrees with this, of course. There is the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis, which, just to be clear, is a fringe theory. Some experts have suggested that the Sphinx only took on its current shape after it was damaged during the biblical flood. Biblical scholars believe the flood, or Noah's flood at least, occurred around 2350 BC. The pyramids and the Sphinx were so huge that the flood waters could not wash them away. At least one Sphinx survived, even though it was very damaged. Proponents of this theory argue that the erosion lines on the Sphinx resemble patterns seen in water-eroded rock formations, not normal desert weathering. The theory argues that the original Sphinx was significantly bigger and didn't have a human head. It may have been a colossal lion statue. Then, after the flood, a new Egyptian civilization rose from the wet ashes of the Nile River. The new Egyptians modified what remained of the Sphinx and carved it with a human head, keeping the rest of it a lion, like the original. So, back to the idea of the two Sphinxes. In 2007, Egyptologist Bassam El-Shama published a study claiming that there was definitely a second Sphinx. A lot of Bassam's evidence came from actual Egyptian beliefs and ancient texts, so that's stuff you can't argue with. Bassam said that having two Sphinxes makes more sense when you know about the Egyptian belief system, which is based entirely on duality. The Egyptians did things in pairs, not in singles. Everything was symmetrical and balanced. Just look at the avenue of Sphinxes at the Temple of Luxor, each Sphinx statue paired with another. Then there are the pyramid texts, ancient writings that give us clues as to who the Sphinxes were truly molded after. Atum, the creator god, formed his son Shu and his daughter Tefnut into the forms of a lion and lioness. The creator god himself placed them on opposite sides of the universe as guardians. So it would actually make a lot of sense for there to be two Sphinxes instead of just one. And now for a quick break, because I wanted to thank Lear Capital for sponsoring today's video. You can probably agree the economy is getting a bit chaotic. Prices are skyrocketing, gas, groceries, everything just keeps getting more expensive, and the national debt just keeps growing. Every day we see more instability, bank failures, market crashes, geopolitical tensions that could erupt at any moment. So if you're just sitting on cash, you are losing purchasing power by the second. That's why protecting your wealth isn't optional, it's a necessity for you and your family. Which is why I want to thank Lear Capital, because in times of uncertainty, you need real assets to safeguard your future. Lear Capital specializes in helping people protect and grow their wealth with gold and other precious metals. When economic and political conditions are volatile like right now, precious metals can be the difference between losing your hard-earned money and protecting it. Lear Capital has over 27 years of experience. They have thousands of 5-star reviews and have handled over $3 billion in trusted transactions. They are the only company with a 24-hour risk-free purchase guarantee. If you change your mind for any reason within 24 hours, you'll get a full refund. If you want to learn more about alternative investments like gold and silver, you can give Lear a call today at 855-271-1871. They'll be happy to answer any questions for you. That's 855-271-1871. Or go to trylear.com/origins and get your free gold and silver wealth protection kit today. With precious metals, you can store them or roll over your existing IRA or 401k into a gold IRA, protecting your retirement while keeping the same tax advantages. And here's the best part. Lear Capital is offering up to $15,000 in bonus coins when you open a qualified account. So go to trylear.com/origins or call today at 855-271-1871 to learn more. I'll leave all the information in the description box, so go check it out. And now back to the video. More evidence of a flood? Archaeologists in Egypt have found something they are calling a first of its kind. When I show you what's in this 4,000-year-old burial chamber, you are going to be blown away. Archaeologists found a tomb containing the bodies of 11 men, women, and children. It appears to have been used as a family cemetery during the 12th dynasty, but that's not what's important here. What makes it unique is that no other tomb from this era has ever been found in this region of Luxor. The tomb was uncovered next door to the Temple of Hatshepsut and is the only tomb from the Middle Kingdom there. This wouldn't be as exciting if not for one other very important aspect of the ancient burial pit. When archaeologists started studying the wooden coffins, they were surprised to find flood damage. The coffins and the linen wrappings of the mummies had clearly gotten very, very wet at some point. It looked as if the whole tomb had been flooded, like someone forgot to turn off the bathwater. Could this be a clue to a long-lost cataclysm that ravaged ancient Egypt, or just the Nile getting out of control? Much of the treasure in the tomb was still intact, but that's more of a testament to the amazing workmanship of the ancient Egyptians. Archaeologists recovered a hippo head amulet, a copper mirror with a lotus-shaped handle, and another mirror decorated with an image of Hathor. Hathor was the Egyptian goddess of the sky, fertility, and love. As for who was buried in the tomb, that's not the easiest mystery to solve. Researchers identified 5 female skeletons, 2 male skeletons, 3 children, and the rest are unknown. For a nation in a hot, sandy desert, Egypt has a few too many monuments and burial grounds that seem to have been soaked in a monster tidal wave from the ancient past. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments. The last temple of ancient Egypt. It was more than 3,000 years after the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza that the Egyptian gods exhaled their last sad breath. What you're about to hear is a story about the last functioning Egyptian temple and its terrible fate. In fact, you might already know what happened to it. The temple was built on an island founded as a religious sanctuary by the Kushites, one of the first foreign empires to seize control of Egypt. The Kushites conquered Egypt long before the Greeks or the Romans. The Kushites came from the cradle of Nubian civilization, far to the south of Egypt in what is currently the country of Sudan. The Kushites emerged as a mighty political force at roughly the same time as the pyramids were being built, around 2450 BC. Their empire was just as big and just as culturally rich as Egypt. It's sad that today, the Kushites are overshadowed by their neighbors to the north. Many people don't even realize the ruins of Nubia are home to hundreds of pure black pyramids. For a brief time during the New Kingdom, Nubia was taken over by Egypt. From 1550 to roughly 1070 BC, the Egyptians ruled both kingdoms. Then things flipped. In the 8th century BC, King Kashta of the Kushites became the king of Egypt. It was during this tumultuous era that the Philae Temple complex began construction. Unlike most Egyptian temples that you find leaning against sand dunes, the Philae complex was built on a tropical island near the city of Aswan, an island that is rumored to have been the burying place of Osiris, or at least one of his burial places. The myth behind Osiris, the god of the dead, lord of resurrection, and master of the afterlife, says that his body was cut into pieces and buried across the world. One of those pieces was buried on Philae Island. Osiris only became god of the underworld after his sister/lover Isis collected his body parts and put them back together using magic. The Kushite rulers started building temples on Philae Island, but ultimately abandoned it. Most of the ruins that survive today were built during the Ptolemaic period, which began 300 years later. The Ptolemaic period was when Egypt was ruled by the Greeks after they were conquered by Alexander the Great. The age lasted up until the death of Cleopatra in 30 BC. It's worth noting that the temples of Philae Island are no longer on the island. When the Aswan Dam was constructed in the 1960s, the island was nearly submerged. The temples would have been destroyed. UNESCO and the Egyptian government worked together to dismantle and rebuild the structures on the island. About 300 years after the major temples were built on the island, Jesus Christ of Nazareth was crucified. Then, 300 years after that, the Edict of Milan in 313 made Christianity a legal religion in the Roman Empire. During this time, the Romans controlled Egypt. As Christians became the predominant religious force in Rome, they also became the predominant religious force in Egypt. Are you still with me? And in fact, most of the Mediterranean and Europe. Slowly, one by one, the pagan temples of the Roman Empire were abandoned or destroyed. Many of them were converted into churches, like the Pantheon in Rome. By 400 AD, there were very few pagan temples left in Roman-controlled territories. The last hieroglyphic inscription was carved into the wall of the last functioning temple in the year 394 AD. Some say ancient Egypt died with Cleopatra. Some say it died on Philae Island with the last hieroglyphics. The Philae complex had once been a labyrinth of temples dedicated to all kinds of gods. The last temple standing, known simply as the Philae Temple, was built in honor of the goddess Isis. It was one of Isis's priests, a man named Esmet Akom, who carved the last hieroglyphic inscription. After Esmet Akom, the knowledge of how to read and write hieroglyphics was lost. Nobody would understand them again until the Rosetta Stone was decoded in the 19th century. By some crazy miracle, the Philae Temple survived another century and a bit. It survived the fall of the Roman Empire and lasted until at least 527 AD. It was during the reign of Byzantine Emperor Justinian that all surviving pagan temples were ordered to be closed. Philae Temple was converted into a Christian church, and most of its inscriptions were chiseled off the walls. And now for a quick break, but first I want to give a big shout out and thank you to I Believe in Fairies and Greg for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you guys. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Getting freaky in ancient Egypt. It turns out the ancient Egyptians were more into psychedelic drugs than archaeologists had ever expected. The Egyptians may have been doing more hallucinogens than those who went to Woodstock in the 1960s. It used to be assumed that Egyptians only partook in hallucinogens during rituals, but a very kooky artifact is now changing that narrative. Davide Tanasi is a scientist at the University of South Florida. David and his colleagues were studying a mug discovered at the Egyptian necropolis of Saqqara when they identified some serious chemical signatures, and some other chemical signatures that might be sort of illegal today. The mug is something I would love to have in my cupboard, and I'm sure you're with me on that. It's 2,000 years old and shaped like the head of Bess. It's like a fun mug you can get at Spencer's with your favorite character's face on it, but ancient and awesome. Bess was the Egyptian god of music, merriment, and childbirth. He was depicted as an unruly old man with a thick beard and sometimes wearing a ferocious lion mask. Bess was also considered a dwarf, like in a fantasy book, only his arms were really long enough that he could drag them on the ground. Weird gods aside, Davide and his colleagues identified the chemical signatures of the components that had once sloshed around in the mug. Nobody knows what the concoction was called or what it was really for, but trust me, it was gross. This mug contained a liquid mixture of alcohol, sesame seeds, pine nuts, grapes, licorice, and honey. That doesn't sound that bad, but listen to the rest of the ingredients. The mixture also contained human bodily fluids that I don't really want to talk about, and it was spiked with psychedelic drugs. Scientists are still trying to figure out how potent this concoction was. Did it give a mellow high? Did it make you drunk? Was it like a fully blown ayahuasca trip? Researcher Branko von Oppen at the Tampa Museum of Art suggested the drink may have been part of a ritual, perhaps even a childbirth ritual, one carried out near where the mug was discovered in the best chambers at the Saqqara necropolis. In other words, a pregnant woman about to give birth was whisked away to a graveyard where she guzzled a disgusting concoction that made her high as a kite. Then she gave birth in a chamber dedicated to a dwarf god who dragged his knuckles like an ape and wore a lion mask. For my lovely viewers who have given birth before, how does this ancient Egyptian ritual sound to you? Would you give it a try? Modified sheep. Mutant sheep! That's what's on the menu next. Archaeologists have discovered brutally deformed sheep skulls at an ancient Egyptian burial site that predates the pyramids. The hideous remains of 6 very big male sheep were found buried at a mortuary complex in Hierakonpolis. Normally, a few sheep skeletons wouldn't be newsworthy, but these sheep had majorly messed up heads. Scientists think the skulls could be the oldest example of human beings modifying the horns of livestock. Can you guess how old these deformed sheep skulls are? Researchers say they date to about 3,700 BC, more than 1,000 years before the first pyramids were constructed in Egypt. Scientists say the horns of the sheep were not oriented in their natural direction. Instead, the horns appear to have been directed upward, almost like pointy dog ears. Some sheep even had their horns completely removed. These days, livestock horns are modified just about everywhere you can find livestock, in nearly every single country. It's a common practice to make sure the animals don't gore each other or their handlers. The first farmers to start modifying horns have always been a bit of a mystery, but with these newly found skulls, scientists think they can trace it back to ancient Egypt. That's another win for the Egyptians. You can put one more tally next to the massive list of firsts that they have. The Egyptians appear to have been coming up with revolutionary ideas even before they started crowning pharaohs and building monuments. Would you buy a mummified falcon? How much would you pay for a mummified bird? If the answer isn't at least $89,660, don't even worry about it. That was the price tag on a rare mummified falcon that recently went on sale in Abu Dhabi. I will admit the bird is rare and kind of awesome. The mummy is complete in its original packaging, meaning its original wooden sarcophagus. It was sold by a private collector from Austria who picked it up while it was at an exhibit in France in the 1980s. Even in the 80s, you could purchase Egyptian mummies relatively easily. It was like buying bootlegged DVDs at a flea market in the 2000s. The mummy falcon is wrapped in delicate linen cloth. Its head is painted beige and black, but the main reason it's so rare is that its body is fully intact. Archaeologists find weird mummies all the time, but normally they're broken. An X-ray of the falcon showed its skeleton perfectly connected, each tiny bone where it should be. The only flaw is that the right wing of the animal is broken, but this might have been on purpose. Researchers believe the wing was broken when the falcon was offered up as a blood sacrifice. It dates back to the 26th dynasty, which was between the 6th and 7th century BC. As cool as the falcon and its coffin are, would you pay $90,000? The Screaming Mummy's secrets revealed. They call her the Screaming Woman Mummy because it looks as if she died in the worst agony imaginable. To be honest, she's kind of hard to look at. Maybe you can handle it better than I can. After almost a century of questions, scientists from Cairo University may have finally figured out why the Screaming Mummy has her mouth gaped open in a soundless shriek. The answer might surprise you. The Screaming Mummy was originally found on an expedition to the Theban necropolis in 1935. Her body was exceptionally preserved. She died during the New Kingdom era when the embalmers of ancient Egypt had reached the apex of their art. Her body was preserved using luxurious ingredients, things like frankincense and juniper oil. The mystery woman had been buried in the family tomb of a famous architect named Senenmut. He was an amazing designer during the reign of legendary Lady Pharaoh Queen Hatshepsut in the mid-1400s BC. Nobody knows the Screaming Mummy's name, but it's assumed she was a close family member. Professor Sahar Salim used all the technological advancements available to properly study the screaming mummy once and for all. One of the most useful tools proved to be CT scans, FTIR analysis, and electron microscopy. Tests revealed the screaming woman to be about 48 years old at the time of her death. Okay, but what about the screaming? Sahar's research showed that the screaming mummy's twisted face could be the result of a cadaveric spasm. When a person dies in the moments afterward, sometimes their muscles become instantly rigid. It's almost like a post-death muscle spasm. When that happens, a person's face can become grotesquely contorted. This is most likely what happened to the nameless friend of Senenmut. It's a little disappointing because it's anticlimactic, but at the same time, it's a relief to know that the look of pure, unadulterated horror on the woman's face was not due to any physical distress. We can all be thankful for that. Instead, she could have died peacefully and then had the muscle spasm a couple seconds later. Her soul had already begun its journey into the Egyptian underworld. Noah and the Egyptian flood. Was Noah Egyptian, and did he build the ark using lost ancient technology? It's a question you may have never considered before, but now I bet you won't be able to get it out of your head. In some ancient depictions of Noah, he's seen as an old man chipping away at a log with a primitive axe. But there is no way Noah built an ark the size of a mountain by whittling away at some wood. Surely he had a bit of help. It's been suggested that Noah belonged to a primitive culture of nomadic herdsmen living somewhere in the Near East. But as we know, thanks to discoveries of places like Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, people in the Near East weren't that primitive at all. People in Turkey were building massive stone temples 12,000 years ago, and that's a fact. Isn't it possible that Noah belonged to the same mighty civilization that constructed the Great Pyramid of Giza? After all, the pyramid and the twin sphinxes predate the flood. Egyptians clearly had technology to build something magnificent like the Ark, so maybe that's exactly what they did. We know that the Sphinx might have flood damage on it, and that 4,000-year-old tombs have been found that were totally filled with water. Following this line of reasoning, doesn't it seem plausible that Egypt was hit by the flood mentioned in the Bible? Noah could have been an Egyptian architect who built a giant boat to try and save what he could of the civilization that was soon to be destroyed. The Bible says that a few generations after the flood, the Tower of Babel was built using incredible technology. The Tower of Babel reached so close to heaven that it offended God, and he tore it down. When you look at ancient Egyptian stonework, their giant sarcophagi and impossibly deep tombs, it makes sense that they could have built something like the Tower of Babel along with the Ark. The Bible could be talking about a real skyscraper. Maybe after the flood, people no longer had the technological means to tackle such huge projects. The pyramid, the Ark, the Tower of Babel, they could all be examples of lost antediluvian technology. Noah may have been the last pre-flood architect to design something amazing. What do you think? Life as a hunchback scribe. From hunchbacks to wrist pain, the toll of sedentary work is timeless. Prepare yourself for one of the most mundane ancient Egyptian discoveries ever. Mundane, but still relatable. It turns out ancient Egyptians suffered from something that plagues a lot of us today. Their posture sucked. Did you know that ancient Egyptian scribes suffered from the same physical ailments as modern-day office workers? New evidence has revealed that ancient Egyptians had poor posture at work. Scribes paid to record the history and mythology of the Egyptian kingdom paid for it with their bodies. If you work in an office or at home in front of a computer screen like me, you know it can take a serious toll on your body. Neck aches, back aches, jaw pain, finger soreness. Well, I haven't had that, but we've all been there. Even the Egyptian scribes did, whose bones were found riddled with arthritis. Scientists from the Czech Republic recently conducted a study of 69 people buried in Egypt's Abu Sir necropolis. The oldest of these skeletons dated to the time of our giant friend Sanacht in 2700 BC. The youngest were from 2180 BC. Even with 500 years of difference, the skeletons showed evidence of suffering from the same workplace injuries. Scientists took a hard look at their shoulders, necks, spines, and jaws. They identified hotspots of degenerative change. The pieces clicked into place when scientists realized the men were mostly scribes, because it says it on their tombs. These ancient Egyptians were hunched over papyrus all day, just like a software engineer is hunched over their computer screen, or someone making YouTube videos. The point is that for 5,000 years, human beings have been breaking their bodies in the name of education and entertainment. It appears to have started with the invention of the written word. Make no mistake though, ancient Egyptian scribes were highly respected members of their community. Literacy levels in ancient Egypt were low, so scribes were basically wizards with words. Wizards who suffered from strain on their spine from long hours of writing, along with stress on their jaw joints and carpal tunnel syndrome. And you thought that was just for hardcore World of Warcraft players. This is how the pyramids were built. Scientists have finally solved what some people consider the greatest mystery in archaeology. They found a lost branch of the Nile River that proves the Egyptians built the pyramids using boats. Ta-da! You're welcome. There are a lot of theories to explain how the pyramids were built. Some think the Nephilim may have had a hand in their creation. Giants could have been used as laborers to lift the humongous stone blocks into place. It's a theory mainstream scientists don't like, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Others believe the pyramids were built using levitation technology. The Egyptians may have figured out how to use sound waves to levitate stone blocks, making it easier to transport material. Physical evidence doesn't support either of those theories. The physical evidence shows that 4,700 years ago, there was a long branch of the Nile that ran 40 miles inland directly to the pyramids. And then it was lost. Scientists only identified this missing river a few months ago, buried under almost 5,000 years of farmland and shifting desert sands. The secret branch of the river went bone dry and was filled in by the Sahara. You might be wondering how it was even discovered if it was so effectively buried by sand. Researchers used satellite imaging and samples of the sediment to identify where the river once ran. The most shocking part might be how big it was. The river ran 82 feet deep and about a third of a mile wide. To give you some perspective, this branch was the same size as the main river is today, but 5,000 years ago it was little more than a skinny byway. That should tell you everything you need to know about how much the Nile has changed since the days of ancient Egypt. The lead author of the study, Eamon Ghanem from the University of North Carolina, mapped and named the new branch. It is now called the Aramat, which is the Arab word for pyramids. Knowing that there was a water channel leading directly to the front door of the Great Pyramid of Giza makes its construction a lot more sensible. Egyptians didn't have to drag building blocks up and down sand dunes. They loaded them onto boats, and the boats dropped them off at the construction site. So there you go. Mystery solved.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Valley of the Golden Mummies. Just south of Cairo, there is an archaeological site known as Bawit. In 1994, it earned its stripes as one of the most astonishing archaeological landmarks in Egyptian history. Researchers discovered a 2-square-mile necropolis that is home to a large number of tombs. The story goes that a man was chasing after his donkey when the donkey's leg fell through a hole in the ground. In the hole was gold. The man called the authorities, who brought in archaeologists. When they first looked inside, they found 105 mummies, some with ornate masks of gold, earning the site its name, the Valley of the Golden Mummies. Dating back to 332 BC, this necropolis has given us a wealth of information about life during this time. Among the 105 mummies found originally, there were a wide variety of burial types. Some had gold masks and chest plates, while others displayed more modest burial techniques involving terracotta and linen. This implies that there are many different kinds of people buried in the valley, representing a wide array of social classes among the dead. Unfortunately, there were no inscriptions found anywhere, so it has been hard to tell who the mummies were. Since then, researchers have predicted that this is nowhere near the end of the story for the valley. Since their original excavation, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds more, each with their own distinctive method of preservation and burial. They estimate that there may be closer to 10,000 mummies in the necropolis. Communal tombs for priests. In the Tuna El Gabal site of Minya, archaeologists recently discovered one of the first Egyptian archaeological discoveries of 2020, a communal tomb that was intended for high priests, the head of the religious caste in ancient Egypt. This necropolis is called Kumun, and it was dedicated to the god Jehuti or Thoth, who represented knowledge, magic, writing, and the moon for ancient Egyptians. The temple priests were very important for the Egyptian culture. They would shave their entire body because it meant having a pure body for the gods. They were the only people who could open the temple's doors and touch the gods' golden sculptures. They burned perfume and incense to make divine the temples, and they used to leave food in front of the golden sculptures as an offering to the god who reigned over the temple. So far, archaeologists have found around 16 tombs, including 20 coffins, that differ in style dramatically. 5 are limestone with engraved hieroglyphic texts depicting stories of different gods, including Osiris and Epi. Others were made of wood, and some were decorated with the titles and names of their owners. They've also found upwards of 10,000 Ushabti figurines, about 5 to 30 centimeters long, engraved with the titles of the deceased, symbolizing the dead. This is yet another discovery in a long line of recent ones in Minya, including mummies, jewelry, and other sacred figurines, making Minya one of the most sought-after archaeological sites in the contemporary world. And now for number 8. But first, let me know your favorite discovery from ancient Egypt in the comments below. Also, I wanted to give a big shout out to Jolly Space Pirate and Sky Chishio. Thanks so much for supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the Origins Explained family. Hatshepsut's mummy. The Valley of the Kings is where archaeologist Howard Carter discovered King Tut's tomb in 1920. But before that, in 1903, he had found a tomb and opened it. Inside were mummified geese and partially disturbed remains of 2 women laying side by side. The tomb was not royal, so the mummies were put away and stored for many years. Thanks to the Discovery Channel and their $5 million DNA project funding, they determined that one of the neglected mummies was the most powerful female ruler of Egypt, Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Egypt's foremost archaeologist Zahi Hawass said that this is the most important discovery in the Valley of the Kings since the discovery of King Tutankhamun, and one of the greatest adventures of my life. Hatshepsut reigned during the 18th dynasty and was one of the most controversial pharaohs of all time. She disturbed some essential Egyptian beliefs. For example, the role of pharaoh was known as the living embodiment of the male god Horus, and disturbing the tradition of rule by men was a big challenge for all the Egyptian traditions. However, she tried to adapt to these patriarchal beliefs. She took the name of Mat-Kare and sometimes referred to herself as Hatshepsu, adding a su, the masculine word, at the end of her name. She often wore men's clothing and a false beard. Under her rule, the Egyptian empire expanded. Upon her death, she was mysteriously erased from history, most likely by her son, who took over the throne. When Zahi Hawass reinvestigated the tomb for the upcoming Discovery Network special, they determined the mummy to belong to a large woman between 45 to 60 years old. Notably, her teeth were in very bad shape. They used a CT scan to look inside a box associated with the queen, where they found a tooth. Incredibly, the size of the tooth matched the mummified remains. This helped to confirm that the unidentified mummy was in fact the pharaoh. She died under very mysterious circumstances. Temple of Bastet. Cats are some of the most beloved creatures on Earth, but as much as you love cats, it's a safe bet that Egyptians loved them even more. Archaeologists recently discovered a temple devoted entirely to the cat deity Bastet in the Qam el-Dekka region of Alexandria. It is a remnant of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, which ruled in the area 305 to 30 BC, until Octavian defeated Cleopatra, the last member of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Researchers think that the temple belonged to Queen Berenike II, who was married to Ptolemy III. Bastet was originally worshipped as a feline with the head of a lion, a relative of the great sun god Ra. But the Hellenistic Egyptians thought of Bastet pretty much the way they thought of the Greek god Artemis. It is the first royal spot in the area discovered to date. The temple is also home to various statues and pieces of pottery. Given that Alexandria sits atop these ancient ruins, there is, without a doubt, much left to be discovered in the area. Valley of the Kings. The Valley of the Kings is one of the most famous cemeteries in all of Egypt, containing King Tut's coffin and a number of other members of ancient royalty. In 2019, the Valley of the Kings became even more interesting. Archaeologists uncovered the mummified remains of 2 women next to the resting place of Hatshepsut, the formidable pharaoh. Those are not the only things that archaeologists uncovered there. In addition, they found a kind of workshop where laborers made things to construct tombs, a few workshops for pottery and furniture, and a room that was clearly meant as a mummification area. They also found a large piece of wood about 3 feet long that looks like a 2-pronged fork, inscribed with hieroglyphs which translate to Lord of the Two Lands. Archaeologists think that this tool might have been something like a forklift to hold furniture to put it inside the tomb. Additional inscriptions found on pottery at the site tell the tale of the workers who devoted their lives to the Valley of the Kings. Researchers hope to reconstruct the lives of those who helped us build the artifacts that amaze us to this day, because these recent discoveries help to tell their stories with accuracy and care. Black sarcophagus. There is yet another recent Alexandrian discovery that had the archaeological world rubbing its hands together in anticipation. In 2018, archaeologists in the Sidi Gaber area of Alexandria discovered a granite sarcophagus that is entirely black. If you're digging around in ancient Egyptian territory for long enough, you're likely to find a coffin or two. But what's interesting about this sarcophagus is that this one hasn't been cracked open for around 2,000 years, an unlikely occurrence given the prevalence of tomb looting for years. They know this because there was a thick coating of mortar between the top and the remainder of the burial chamber. Upon this discovery of the black sarcophagus, stories began circulating that the tomb was cursed. It was found when local authorities were doing the standard archaeological excavations before construction begins on new projects. About 16 feet below the ground, they found the coffin along with an alabaster bust of a man. It is said to be the largest sarcophagus ever found in Alexandria. Despite the possible curse, officials finally opened the coffin to discover 3 skeletons and red-brown sewage water. No one knows who these people are, and it's too soon to tell. But given these recent Alexandrian discoveries, along with our improving technology, it must surely be an exciting time to be an Egyptologist. World's oldest cheese. Cheese lovers of the world, unite! Cheese is one thing that can bring us all together. And if you're of an adventurous nature, maybe you'd be interested in trying some aged cheese. But this cheese is probably a little too aged for even your liking. This 3,200-year-old wheel of cheese was found in Mayor Ptolemy's tomb, but in 2018 it was discovered that it was full of bacteria that can cause the potentially fatal disease brucellosis, caused by unpasteurized dairy. But who was Ptolemys? He was the mayor of Memphis, Egypt in the 13th century BC. His tomb was actually uncovered a while back in 1885, but until 2010 it had disappeared into the misty sands of the desert. Inside his tomb was a large jar of solidified gunk that was determined to be cheese, probably made from cow, sheep, and goat's milk. It is possible that ancient people may have used cheese as medicine. Until now, though, there was no proof of whether or not it was part of the daily life of ancient Egyptians, and researchers aren't quite sure what it would have tasted like. Regardless, this makes this sample the world's oldest cheese, and the world's oldest reported biomolecular evidence of brucellosis. Tomb of Kui. In Saqqara, Egypt, archaeologists recently discovered the mummy of Kui, a highly decorated official under the reign of Pharaoh Djedkar Isesi. This means that Kui's remains are 4,400 years old, but it appears that time has not done a great deal of damage. However, there was another tomb found nearby which had been ransacked long ago, making this tomb a lucky find for archaeologists. Kui's tomb is decorated with intricate hieroglyphs and pictures still decipherable today. These hieroglyphs are what enabled experts to discern the nature of this tomb and Kui's role in the pharaoh's administration. For example, they discovered some of his titles, such as Overseer of the Kentui of the Great House and Great One of the Ten of Upper Egypt. Clearly, Kui was pretty high up. The design of Kui's tomb has a lot to owe to the pyramids. In order to enter the tomb, one must descend down a corridor into a hallway which leads to an antechamber. In that room, there is a depiction of him sitting before an offering table and 2 spots that lead into his resting place. This floor plan is remarkably similar to the kind constructed beneath the pyramids in Egypt's 5th dynasty. Given its intricacy and informativeness, Kui's tomb is sure to be a hub of interesting information for years to come. Cachette of the Priests. Archaeologists were rightly stunned by what they found at El Asasif, an ancient necropolis near Luxor, Egypt. They found the mummified remains of 30 people locked inside of tightly closed coffins, estimated to be around 3,000 years old. It was denominated a cachette, which means a place where things were hidden away. The coffins were arranged in 2 layers. This discovery is now referred to as the Cachette of the Priests, as some of these bodies belong to those among the priestly class of ancient Egyptian society. They were preserved with incredible care. When the coffins were opened at a press conference, onlookers were stunned to see their wrapping completely untouched. There are 23 men, 5 women, and 2 children in these sarcophagi, and the bodies aren't the only astounding thing about these tombs. Each coffin bears detailed paintings depicting some of the famous Egyptian deities. Experts are still trying to translate the hieroglyphics and analyze the drawings on the coffins. Hopefully this will make it clearer who these people were, why they were buried in the cachette, and what their lives were like. Pyramid mystery. Recently, archaeologists discovered something strange beside a 4,600-year-old pyramid, the ancient remains of a 13-year-old girl in a squatting position inside of her otherwise empty tomb. No one knows when she was buried, but they found out about her age by looking at her skeleton. There were also animal heads, probably from bulls, and tiny ceramics in the makeshift cemetery. However, these may not have been placed there for the girl at all. Archaeologists aren't sure whose funeral they were meant for. Called the Meidum Pyramid, it was initially a step pyramid before it was converted into a true pyramid with smooth surfaces. Its entrance is on the north face of the pyramid above ground level, which takes you to a vertical shaft that leads down to the burial chamber. There is no sarcophagus and no evidence of a burial, so it is likely that this pyramid was used as an experiment. Ancient Emperor Snefru guided the construction of many pyramids and gave the Meidum Pyramid a significant remodeling, upgrading it from a step pyramid to a smooth one. No one is quite certain when or why he felt the need to construct so many pyramids, but it might be that he was trying to figure out the best way to make them. His trial and error must have worked, since he passed that knowledge down to his son Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid of Giza. Because of this discovery, the nature of the Meidum Pyramid and Snefru's intentions with it are mysterious. Why the cemetery next door? Probably some part of Meidum was built for Snefru in particular, and he changed it later. In any case, his influence on the pyramids is undeniable, even if we are still unsure about his plans. Thanks for watching! Have you ever been to Egypt? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on the latest videos. See you soon! Bye!